Hi there, everyone. Reverend Beth Simmons here with a midweek moment. So this month, we have been focusing on the book of Jonah. At least somewhat. We had 2 snow days. One of those we did Lectio Divina, studying the prayer that Jonah calls out when he's in the belly of the big fish. And then last week we just had a conversation. So we read the full text, all 4 chapters of Jonah, the first Sunday of this month, and we will conclude our study of Jonah this coming Sunday with a little look of a section towards the end. But sort of Jonah has been flowing through our month together. And so for this midweek moment, I want to share 2 things. First, I'm not sure if you have seen in the news, but recently there was, I think it was perhaps somewhere in South America, there was a kayaker who was taken into a whale's mouth and spit back out again, which, and of course all the headlines are like, kayaker swallowed by whale, and not swallowed, taken into the mouth and spit back out again, which I just think is so timely given our study of Jonah. And the second thing is I wanted to just make mention of one of the themes that is present in Jonah and carries throughout the rest of the Bible. So we see a lot of this in the Bible, certain themes that come up over and over and over again, major themes and minor themes. And okay, so maybe I want to talk about 3 things. So kayaker. The second is that Jonah is often read as a story, just sort of like a mythological tale, a fable with a meaning, but not actually factual. And the questioning of the possibility of the story of Jonah actually being factually real goes back way to the early Christian fathers like Augustine. People are questioning, really, could you really survive in the belly of a fish or whale for 3 days? Science tells us no, most likely not. However, I very often remind people, especially people who struggle with how to interpret stories in the Bible, that there is a difference between fact and truth. And whether or not something factually happened in the Bible or in the way that it's written in the Bible or the story got passed down, that does not mean that it does not hold truth within that story. And so Jonah has a few different truths to offer, but the one I want to focus on today, so here's point number 3, is we don't know who Jonah was. He's given a reference or a place in that who his father was, Amittai, but that's it. Nobody knows who exactly he was. There's some question of whether they just gave him that name because of a reference in another part of Scripture. They don't know exactly what time he would have been living in. He's nobody important. And yet he was called by God to give this important message, to make this journey. And yet it is his story that was passed down generation to generation. You need to remember that before any of these stories were written, even in the most ancient of Hebrew manuscripts, they were oral narratives. And so this story very likely was passed down was told around campfires or in worship settings and shared for a purpose. And then it was written, and then it was kept in the Bible and kept as canon, and is probably one of the most well-known stories, just because it's really accessible to kids, and it's just one of those, anybody who goes to Sunday school is going to end up finding about Jonah and the big fish, or the whale, it's often told. But who is Jonah? No, nobody. And that is a theme that carries through the Bible, that God does not necessarily, or very rarely does God choose and call upon those with prestige, those with the right ancestral line, those in power, those with wealth. God seeks out, calls upon, and raises up those whom we would otherwise think of as nobody. I think for those of us, many of us, the majority of us, who, while we don't see ourselves as unimportant, in comparison to others who have more wealth or prestige or power or a name, a famous name than we do, we might consider ourselves as nobody important. And yet, that is exactly the kind of person that God will call upon to bring a message where it is needed, to speak truth to power, to care for those in need. Jonah is often compared to Jesus in many ways, and in fact, even in the Gospels, there is a referral back to Jonah. But I think this is one of those places where Jonah is sort of like Jesus. Jesus was a nobody, at least at first. This is who God chose. So when you are feeling like there is nothing you could possibly do to change the world, or even your little tiny section of the world, because you don't have the right name or position or the right number of numbers in your bank account, just remember that that's not what God deems important. And that's not always who we'll remember. We remember Jonah, a nobody, a minor prophet. And we remember his story. And maybe people will remember yours too. Just listen for God calling you. And maybe don't run the other way like Jonah did. And even if you do, God will probably come chasing after you. Friends, I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope that things go as well as they can. I hope you find glimmers of joy and moments of delight and pockets of hope. And that you hear, however still and small, the calling of the divine on your life that then is responded to, that mirrors the divine in you already. Be well.